Hey, welcome back this afternoon. I'm a little behind on recording, but that's okay. I'm going to start doing maybe some giveaways during these to make sure that some of you at home are actually like listening to the lectures or to, let me know that I'm not doing this in vain. I'm not seeing a whole lot of views on these videos. I could understand. I don't want to hear me talk either. But maybe if I maybe if I have you comment on this video when you watch it, I could see about giving some bonus points on the next test. So go ahead and do that. Shoot me an email or a comment on the video and let me know that you've watched and let me know that you're hearing me at least, and we can get some bonus points going or something like that. Okay. So we're starting off where we left off with the rise of big business. So this should be a review, honestly. Big businesses referring to corporations. Corporations make money by selling stocks or small ownerships within their company. And basically, these corporations are treated as a person in law. They can own property, it can own taxes, it can pay taxes, it can make contracts, it can sue, it can be sued. So corporations are made up of stockholders. They don't have one singular owner. Hundreds of people could own stock in a corporation. An example of that would be Walmart. No one person owns all of Walmart. Hundreds of people own stocks in Walmart. So issuing stocks allows those corporations to raise a lot of money. And so they can raise a lot of money without a lot of risk because they're taking in money from outside sources. And so you can typically get by with producing more goods at a faster rate for a cheaper price for consumers. So big businesses are really important for keeping prices low for consumers during this time. But it's also kind of bad because it cuts down on the small mom and pop shops that you see because the small businesses aren't able to really compete with the big corporations as much. So you have two types of costs in business. This should also be a review. You have fixed costs and you have operating costs. If you have a fixed cost, it's something that's the same every month. You can anticipate paying the same cost every month. If you're paying operating costs, that's a cost that changes from month to month. So your example of a fixed cost would be your rent or your mortgage. Example of an operating cost would be the wages that you pay your workers, because you may not have the same amount of workers every month. You may not pay them all the same wages every month. And so they may work fewer hours, some may work more hours, and that's going to change. Your electricity bill may change from month to month. It's going to be different depending on how much electricity you use. So small manufacturers, like those mom and pop shops, those private owned shops, have low fixed costs because they're smaller businesses, but they have really high operating costs. So if sales drop, then it's cheaper for them to just shut down temporarily. On the other hand, if you're a big manufacturer, you're going to have really high fixed costs, but your operating costs are probably going to be cheaper. So if sales drop, it only makes sense to continue operating as a big corporation. So some of the advantages, not only can they produce goods more cheaply and efficiently than smaller corporations, smaller businesses, they could also continue to operate in poor economic times and cut prices to increase sales rather than shutting down. A lot of these are actually used to negotiate rebates from railroads. They get better prices from railroads because they can fill up more rail cars than your average small businesses would. And a lot of people just kind of like start to buy into that because they can get all these products for way cheaper. So a lot of people that are a part of the small companies do find large corporations to be kind of a threat. And so you start to see a lot more people think that large corporations are unethical, they're driving small companies out of business, they're not necessarily playing fair, and they need to be regulated more. And so we'll kind of like talk about that as well. So even though falling prices benefited consumers, it also cuts into profits. Because after a while, once you get the prices cut so low, you get to the point where you're not really making as much money. You're producing it so quickly or so efficiently that you have to drop the price too low. So to keep prices from falling, a lot of companies would organize pools. And what they would do is they would all meet together. Let's say all of the tire companies in the United States would just get together and meet, and they would set the price that they would sell tires. They're like, we're able to all produce tires pretty quickly, pretty efficiently. Prices are dropping. To keep prices up and so that we can still make money, why don't we all agree that we're not going to sell any tires below $100? If you want a tire, you're going to have to pay at least $100 for it. And everyone would just kind of like mutually agree, okay, $100 is a good price. And that would kind of help cut back some on falling prices because everyone would agree to kind of give in to competition and not really promote competition. Unfortunately, you have no like legal obligations whenever you do this. It's just kind of a verbal agreement usually. These don't really like hold up in court, and so you have a lot of pools that don't last very long because one person may say that they're only going to sell tires for $100, but then they turn around after nobody's paying attention and they start selling their tires for $99 so that people will buy their tires instead of other tires. So a lot of competition reduced many industries to very few large and high efficient corporations by the 1870s as a result. So Andrew Carnegie is one of my favorite rags to riches stories. He is actually, he really does start from nothing. Like, what is that Drake song? Started from the bottom, now he's here. So he's the son of like a really poor Scottish hand weaver. He comes to the United States as a young child, and he starts working as a bobbin boy in a textile factory for $1.20 a week whenever he's 12 years old. So then by the time he's 14, he becomes a messenger in a telegraph office. Then he works as a secretary to the superintendent of the company. And then whenever Thomas Scott becomes president of the company, he makes Carnegie the new superintendent. So he basically recognizes his hard work, his work ethic, and rewards him for that. He's like, I know that, you're young, and I know that you didn't go to school for this, or you may not have the experience, but like, I know you're a hard worker, and I think you deserve to be superintendent while I'm president. And so he builds his way up, essentially. By the time he's 30, he's earning $50,000 a year, which is pretty much, that's more money than I make right now as a teacher with 2 degrees. So yeah, Carnegie buys shares in iron mills and factories so that he can invest in companies that are making railroad bridges and such. And then he starts traveling to Europe because he's got all this extra money. He's like, I'm going to quit my job and just kind of like focus on business investments. He's got the money to do it, so whatever, might as well. So he goes and he starts hanging out with Sir Henry Bessemer, who had invented a new process for making high quality steel more efficiently and more cheaply. So Carnegie takes Sir Henry Bessemer's process and he brings it to America and opens a steel company in Pittsburgh using that process. And so he's able to produce large amounts of steel for really low prices. And he eventually begins the vertical integration of the steel industry so that he can own all of the different businesses that it depended on for operation. So basically, any kind of like product or any kind of company that he would need to pay or that he would need to work with to produce steel, instead of paying them for their products, he just bought out the companies. So if he needed coal or limestone or iron, he just bought them out. He's like, I'm not going to pay you. I would rather own you, because then he has essentially a monopoly over all these things. So Rockefeller is kind of similar. He's another one of those like really famous industrialists. He achieves almost complete horizontal integration of his industry, which is Standard Oil. So he becomes Standard Oil becomes the nation's largest oil refiner because he builds a ton of refineries and buys out all of his competitors. And eventually by 1880, like within 10 years, he controls 90% of the oil refining industry. pretty much a monopoly. I mean, he doesn't have very much competition. So a lot of states start seeing these companies that are essentially creating monopolies and reducing any kind of competition in these different companies, these different industries, especially like Standard Oil and the steel industry. So a lot of states start making it illegal for one company to own stock in another company so that they could stop the horizontal integration and the rise of monopolies. They wanted to keep competition up. Competition is good. Competition keeps prices down. If you have one person that owns all of one particular industry, they can set the price at whatever they want. So Rockefeller, since he owns Standard Oil, he could easily say, since I own 90% of the oil in the United States, I'm going to set the price at $5 a gallon. Like he can set the price at whatever he wants. And there's no one that can really like complain about it because he doesn't have any competition to give lower prices. So to promote competition, we make it illegal to own stocks in other companies and to stop this from happening. So a trust is a legal arrangement that allows one person to manage another person's property. So basically, I don't own your property, but I'm going to manage it for you, and I'm going to do what you want me to do with it for a small profit. I'll be your trustee. You can trust me. I'll run your company, and I will make sure that your company does good. So instead of buying a company, Standard Oil has stockholders give their stocks to a group of Standard Oil trustees. So in exchange, the stockholders would get shares in the trust, and then they would get a portion of the profits. Why not? Trustees don't own the stock. It's not their stock. It's still Standard Oil stock. They just manage it, and they just do what Standard Oil tells them to do. So Standard Oil makes it look like on paper that other people are investing in its stock and other people are controlling it. But in all actuality, like, they're managing their own company, they're putting their own money into their own company, they're preventing any type of like competition from ever taking place. They're making all the decisions. Another form of this, reducing competition, is holding companies. So basically, what would happen is, in 1889, New Jersey basically says, we'll have this new general incorporation law that says corporations can own stock in other businesses without any kind of special legislative action. Cool. So a lot of companies would use that law to create holding companies. And basically, the holding company doesn't produce anything. It just owns stock in the companies that do produce goods. It makes a profit off of those. So a holding company will manage the company that it owns and then merges its company with another company. Then you have investment banking, which is where JP Morgan makes a lot of his money. Basically, what he does is he buys up stocks from companies for really cheap prices, and then he sells them for higher prices to other people. Kind of tricky, but he makes quite a bit of money. Eventually, he's able to buy out Andrew Carnegie, and and he merges Carnegie Steel with a bunch of other steel companies and creates the U.S. Steel Company. It's the very first billion-dollar company in American history, and it's all because he basically swindled people out of their stocks. He's like, yeah, I'll buy your stock for $5, and then I'll turn around and sell it for 10, and he makes a living doing that. Totally illegal now. So with the creation of all of these corporations, you get a lot of products. So a lot of the new products and companies that are coming out, they have to, have to sell them somewhere, obviously. So we get department stores. So one of the first advertising companies started creating these illustrated ads and magazines so that people could kind of see what stores had to offer. And the department store is really cool because up until now, you didn't have a store that had everything that you needed in one place. So department stores are kind of luxurious. It's a cool way to go shopping. You can get everything you need in one building. It's a cool atmosphere. And of course, they have really good advertising. So, it's different. With department stores, you also get chain stores, which are kind of cool. I mean, you have a group of retail stores that are owned by the same company, and this starts happening in the 1800s. So, one example that you've probably heard of is Sears. Sears was one of these very first chain stores, and it still exists today. It's not quite the same. The Sears that we had here in Jonesboro has it's gone out of business, and I think I've heard that there's one coming back that it's going to be privately owned, or I'm not really entirely sure, but anyway, Sears was one of the first chain stores. And what's really cool about chain stores is that they would start sending out mail order catalogs with different advertisements so that even if you didn't live in the big city and you weren't able to come to these big chain stores or these big department stores very often, you could shop through the mail catalog, order something through the mail, and it's just as good. It's kind of like us ordering stuff off Amazon now. We we do that pretty frequently. So, like for workers, we're talking about these corporations and their products. We have to look at the workers, the people who work in these corporations or work in these companies and these factories. So, life for workers in industrial America is very difficult. A lot of them have to perform dull, repetitive tasks in working conditions that are unhealthy and dangerous. So, a lot of them breathe in lint, they breathe in dust, toxic fumes, they get paid crap, they don't have workman's comp. So, if you get hurt, most of the time you probably just get fired. It's just very unsafe. Even though it's terrible, terrible working conditions, industrialism still leads to a rise in the standard of living. So your average worker's wages go up 50% between 1860 and 1890 because they're producing so much and they're doing so good. But eventually you get some problems because you've got men who work 59, 60 hours a week and make 22 cents an hour, no overtime, by the way. You start to see some tensions between the working class who is making jack squat and working all the hours and the wealthy people who own the companies. So they're producing all these goods and they're not able to sell them for really high prices because of deflation. And so companies just start cutting wages. They're like, sorry, we can't afford to pay you because we're not making any more money anymore. We're gonna have to cut wages now. So prices would fall, wages would get cut, and workers would basically be irritated about everything because you don't want to be told, hey, you're getting a pay cut after you've worked your way up to 22 cents an hour. And so sometimes, and this would happen sometimes multiple times, you would get your pay cut, not one time, not two times, but three times sometimes. So workers started forming unions so that they could bargain for higher wages and better working conditions. And this is where you start to see a lot of people fighting for these better working conditions in America. We can really look back at these people and kind of thank them because now we have a minimum wage, we have a set number of work hours each week. You have to get paid overtime if you work over a certain number of hours. You get workman's comp, you get insurance, you get benefits. There's a lot of really nice results of these unions that form. So your early unions consist of craft workers and common laborers. If you're a craft worker, you probably have some sort of craft skills. You've trained, you can do something like build things. I don't know. You're not just running a machine. If you're a common laborer, you probably don't have very many skills. You probably just turn a machine on, flip switch, whatever, and you don't get paid as much. So employers start negotiating with trade unions because they represent workers whose skills they need. So basically, employers are viewing unions as conspiracies. They don't really agree with them. They actually oppose industrial unions because they think it's just people trying to cause trouble for the most part. And a lot of companies would start using techniques to stop workers from forming unions. So basically they would make them pay or take an oath or sign a contract saying they're not going to be a part of a union. And then they would hire detectives to identify union organizers and placed those people on blacklists so they couldn't get jobs. So if you were a part of a union, it was very well known, and people were not allowed. Like, it was a thing. Like, you could not be hired because you were part of a union. Which now, like, people are encouraged to be a part of a union. You know, like there's teacher unions and stuff like that. So companies use lockouts to break union strikes by locking workers out of properties. And they basically would just say, like, since you're striking, we're not paying you. And a lot of times these people would like lose their jobs because they could just like hire new people to replace them. A lot of the efforts to break unions often succeeded because there weren't any laws that gave workers rights. You know, you don't. No workers have rights right now. It's his word against his word, and you've caused a ruckus, and so you're probably not going to get anywhere in court. Courts would say that strikes were conspiracies. A lot of people would get fined or jailed. They weren't having it. They didn't trust it. They didn't know what was going on. It was different. It's radical. So unions also suffered from perception that they were un-American, and that's because we start to see a lot of people coming in from Europe during the 1800s who are, we assume, followers of Marx or supporters of socialism or communism. And so in the 1800s, Karl Marx has all of his ideas, you know, we refer to it as Marxism, that become very influential because a lot of people are going through the same thing that Americans are going through in factories over in Europe as well. If not, they've gone through it before the Americans. And so they are upset with the way that they're being treated in factories. They're upset with the crappy amount of money that they're making. And they're just like they're not happy with capitalist society. So Marx, some of his ideas basically say that there's going to be a class struggle between workers and owners. And he basically says that the workers who are treated terribly are eventually going to revolt, seize control of the factories, and overthrow the government. And when they do that, they're going to create a classless society where everyone is equal, everyone makes the same amount of money, and everyone is treated the same because they're so tired of being treated like crap. And so this is his idea. This is a utopian society. We know that this isn't really the best situation, but you have to understand where he's coming from with this. And a lot of people follow him because they agree. They're tired of being treated terribly. They're tired of being paid terrible wages. They're tired of not getting any kind of benefits. And so they're like, you know what? A socialist society where wealth is evenly distributed and where we don't have like the wealthy people in control of everything sounds good. And so you have a lot of people that follow in. Unfortunately, with Marxism, you also get a lot of anarchists. So anarchists believe that society doesn't need government. Society should be able to exist without the government. Some of them that believed with only a few acts of violence, they could ignite a revolution and topple the government completely. Anarchists would assassinate government officials. They would set off bombs in Europe. They're trying to start a revolution in the 1800s. And so these anarchists kind of get mixed up with the Marxists, and it just gives everyone a bad reputation because they see them as just like these violent radicals who are not necessarily trying to get workers' rights. They're just trying to like topple the government. So during the same period, we have a lot of European immigrants coming into America. Obviously, we're reading the newspapers and we know that these bombings are taking place in Europe. We know that there's a lot of anarchists and Marxists in Europe. And so as Americans, we start to see a lot of people looking down on European immigrants because they don't necessarily trust them. They're associating those immigrant workers with the radical ideas of anarchism and Marxism, and they're becoming very suspicious of the unions. A lot of times, your immigrant workers come for work. They're really just coming to live the American dream, okay? They're just trying to get a job and start a new life. And like a lot of times, whenever they join unions, a lot of the companies, the factory owners, they get a little suspicious and they're like, "Nah, y'all just trying to start some anarchy. Y'all trying to overthrow the government here." So everybody focuses on emphasizing law and order And a lot of officials start using police and courts and even the army to crush strikes and break up unions because they're afraid that that's what's going to start happening in the United States too. So, in 1873, there's a severe recession that strikes the American economy, and a lot of companies start cutting wages. So keep in mind, we already know that there are a lot of people who, fear unions, and they fear anarchy and Marxism or socialism. And so as a result, whenever you start to see people like panic or freak out about wages getting cut, things get a little violent. So that's the case here with the Great Railroad Strike. Basically, the American economy struggles so bad that a lot of companies have no choice but to cut wages. So the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad announced cutting wages for a third time in 1877. And at this point, workers in West Virginia walked off. They blocked the tracks. They just went berserk. They were tired of it. And so they're like, this is not fair. This is not one time, not two times, but three times that you've cut our wages. So the railroad workers across the country start walking off their jobs, and they eventually involved 80,000 total railroad workers, and it affects over 2/3 of the nation's railways. So strikers smashed equipment, they tore up tracks, they blocked rail services, they even drew up arms when militias were coming to break up strikes. President Hayes eventually has to send in state militias to help the police break up the strikes. And it takes 12 days of fighting to actually kind of get everything back in order. 100 people die, and there's $10 million in railroad property destroyed all over a strike because people's wages were cut. Not once, not twice, but three times. And so this is a depiction of the Great Railroad Strike where everybody's kind of like burning buildings down. Like it is like pure anarchy for the most part. Like people are just kind of getting buck, blocking the railroad so people can't come through. And obviously that's bad, Here's a historical marker that kind of signifies the event of the Great Railroad Strike in 1877. It's a historical marker now because we look at it as like, the strike that kind of began the labor movement and led to eventually like rights that we got, like workers' rights that we have today. So the Knights of Labor is another kind of like union group, but they take a different approach to labor issues. Instead of striking, they boycott different employers. They also support arbitration, which is where they have a third party come in, like another person that's unbiased, comes in and hears both sides and helps the workers and employers reach an agreement. The Knights are looking for an 8-hour workday. They want equal pay for women. They want to abolish child labor, and they want to create worker-owned factories. So they are pretty radical for the time, which is crazy because like this is all stuff that we have today. But child labor is common. Women didn't get paid as much as men. There was no such thing as an 8-hour workday. Like people worked from like sun up to sundown until they were told to go home. So the Knights of Labor are very they're very important to remember because they not only supported men who were working, but also women and African American members, unlike most of the organizations at this time who were predominantly focused on the rights of white men. So another riot that comes is the Haymarket riot, and this really gives unions a really bad reputation. So the Haymarket riot happens in 1886. You have a bunch of supporters of the 8-hour workday who call for a nationwide strike. On May 3rd, the police kind of show up and they try to stop a fight at a picket line at the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company, and 4 workers are killed. And when this happens, because these workers are killed, who knows what happened exactly, an anarchist group organizes a meeting at Chicago's Haymarket Square to protest the shooting and the strikers because they didn't think it was right that the police were able to shoot these people. It was unfair. These people lost their lives, and they were simply just trying to protest. So 3,000 people had gathered to hear about the speeches. All they're doing is giving speeches. As the meeting starts to break up, the police are moving in, and they're trying to keep order. At this point in time, someone throws a bomb, we don't know who, and an officer is killed, and then 6 other officers are wounded. So then the police start opening fire up at the workers, and then the workers start shooting the police. And it's just this big shootout. And so about 100 people, including 70 police officers, are injured in some form. 8 people are arrested, and all 8 men are convicted. 4 of them are executed. Critics pointed to the Haymarket riot to claim that the unions were dominated by these dangerous radicals. And they would just say, like, you saw what happened at Haymarket. All they did was they threw a bomb and this and this is what happened, and the police had no choice. And so it kind of just gives anyone who's a part of a union or anyone who's part of like strikes or riots or protests, like gives them a bad reputation. Here's one of the meetings, and I really like to show that this is in 2 different languages. You've got a German poster here at the bottom. It's the English version and the German version, because a lot of these workers are foreign immigrants. And here you have part of the riot where the police and the workers are shooting out. And here we have a plaque, the Haymarket Martyrs Monument, and it's a National Historic Landmark. And you see that all these people are like drawing like the anarchist signs and stuff. Like, first they took your life, now they exploit your memory. These people are trying to like do something good, and now all these people are just like putting anarchy signs everywhere. How does that pay out? So another strike is the Homestead strike. So a steel mill owned by Andrew Carnegie in Homestead, Pennsylvania, was managed by an anti-union business partner who was Henry Clay Frick. And basically his employees belonged to the Amalgamated Association of Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers, which was like the largest craft union in the country. When the union's contract was about to expire, Frick basically says like he's either going to cut wages by 20% and lock people out of the plant and arrange for another agency to bring in replacement workers, because he doesn't want to have to deal with people who are a part of this like large craft union. And so when the Pinkertons and the strikebreakers approach, the strikers refuse to let him in, and they won't let them land. They start shooting. They're like, no, this is not happening. So a lot of the Pinkertons and strikers were dead and injured as a result, and the government ends up sending in the militia again to help protect the replacement workers. Eventually, the strike collapses. It takes 4 months for the entire strike to collapse. Another example, the Pullman strike. So this is railroad employees start organizing the American Railway Union under the leadership of Eugene V. Debs in 1893. So the ARU tries to, the American Railway Union, tries to organize all the employees of the railroad industry, including the Pullman Palace Car Company. So George Pullman is the owner, and he had built the company a town. And what he did was he not only did he build this town, he made his workers live in the town and buy goods from the town as well. So basically, he's like playing God with all these workers. He's like, you work for me, then you live in my town, and you buy stuff from my store. So he's like controlling their wages and setting prices for like their goods too. In 1893, the Pullman Company laid off workers and slashed wages, which made it really difficult for workers to pay their rent. They know what the rent costs at the Pullman Company because they're making them rent from their town. They can't pay for the high prices of the company stores either. And so the company refuses to discuss workers' grievances, and so the workers strike. So the American Railway Union members refuse to handle the Pullman cars. This ties up a bunch of railroads and threatens the economy because this makes up quite a bit of the nation's railroads. So the railroad managers basically are going to put U.S. mail carriers to be attached to the Pullman cars. And if they do this, then it's going to be a violation of federal law because they're interfering with the U.S. government's mail. And so basically the president sets them up and says, either you can deliver and handle these cars and deliver this mail, or you are going to be considered like violating federal law. So Grover Cleveland, who's president at the time, sends in troops and says that it's his responsibility to keep the mail running. So the federal court issues an injunction or a formal court order directing the union to halt the boycott. Debs goes to jail for violating the injunction. but both the strike at Pullman and the ARU strike collapsed. In the case of Henry Debs in 1895, the Supreme Court upheld the right to issue such an injunction and gave business a powerful tool for dealing with labor unrest. Nuts. Even though they were basically like making the workers, torturing them. Here they are. There's some of the Pullman cars where they had the mail orders. Everybody trying to kind of like fight it out and stay strong so they wouldn't have to handle the cars so they could get their wages increased again. So the American Federation of Labor was a dominant union in the 1800s, and it focused on promoting the interests of skilled workers. Samuel Gompers, who was president of the AFL, tried to steer away from the controversy, and he focused on like a pure and simple union. He basically just says, like, here, this is what we're going to do. We're going to convince companies to recognize us and, agree to collective bargaining. We're going to try to promote closed shops, which, companies would only be able to hire union members. And then we're going to fight for an 8-hour workday. So even though you've got the American Federation of Labor that's pushing for these 3 goals, they only represent 15% of non-farm workers. And most of them are white men. So they don't really represent African Americans. They don't represent women. But they are known as like one of the bigger union organizations. So women in this time are, while you have a lot of women who work at home, who take care of the home, you do have 18% of women in the labor, 18 of the labor force made up of women by 1900. A third of these people are working as domestic servants. A third of them are working as teachers or nurses or sales clerks. And then a third of them are working as industrial workers in the garment industry or food processing plants. So women are paid less than men, even if they perform the same jobs. They are not included in these unions, as you saw. And most of them are forced to just kind of like deal with it. It's like, you're not supposed to be working anyway. You're supposed to be at home taking care of the kids and making dinner. Is really kind of like how people saw it. It's very radical for women to work outside of the home. So one woman, Mary Harris Jones, or Mother Jones, was one of the most famous labor organizers for women. And she was labeled the most dangerous woman in America by John D. Rockefeller because she was so persuasive and such a, wonderful public speaker. She pushed out for women's rights and was very well known for that. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union was one union that won recognition in the industry and got better wages and benefits for employees. And that was kind of a big deal for women because they're usually not represented very well at this time. There was also the Women's Trade Union League, and it was dedicated to promoting women's labor issues as well. So they pushed for an 8-hour workday, minimum wage, end of evening work for women so that they can be home taking care of their children, and the abolition of child labor, because children at this time are forced to work in factories, which it may be helpful to an extent because they're making money to take home to their families. But a lot of times these children are exploited and they're put in dangerous working conditions, and it's just not safe. Like 10-year-olds working in factories just doesn't really go very well. You have a lot of children getting hurt in factories. But yeah, this is the last slide for this particular chapter. We are completing study guides and testing tomorrow. If you need something, email me, let me know. If you have any questions, you can go back through the slides, or you can email, or I can set up a Zoom with you. Thank you.